But let's start off with David.
Thank you very much, Tom. My name is David Donahue. I'm an American lawyer, and it's a privilege to be here today at the origin of a modern democracy to speak with you about American legislation and American democracy as it pertains to healthcare policy. Perhaps you've read the novel The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Although fictional, I think this novel is an allegory to today's debate regarding healthcare policy in America. In the 1930s, there was a period of economic turmoil, of course, and there was a migration of individuals westward from the Great Plains to places like Oregon or California in search of a better life. As Thomas Jefferson might say, these individuals were in pursuit of happiness. The allegory to today's debate and policy arguments is that we presently have a period of economic turmoil, but instead of individuals migrating westward, we have politicians migrating eastward to Washington, D.C. in an attempt to socialize the American healthcare business. So today's phrase is not so much Oregon or bust as it is Obamacare or bust. I'm going to just touch briefly upon some of the elements of Obamacare and discuss how this bill might become law, and leave to my colleagues on the panel some of the more particular points pertaining to hospitals and healthcare travel insurance. The essential thing to take from this presentation or panel discussion here today is that the injection of this new policy will be inherently unpredictable. It will be an earthquake of legislative action, and there will be years of aftershocks as the Obamacare policies are amended or edited. Here are a couple of the important components of Obamacare as they pertain to travel insurers or healthcare providers in the American market. There will be an expansion of the Medicaid program. The proposition is to increase the pool of so-called insureds under the Medicaid program. This was originally intended to cover impoverished Americans. It was part of the Great Society legislation passed by Lyndon Johnson in the 60s. And the requirements will be loosened for enrollment in that program under the Obamacare proposals. There's also the idea of public insurance, euphemistically called the public option. The idea here being that the U.S. taxpayer is the underwriter of healthcare insurance for an additional group of Americans. There's the idea of a mandate, whether it be individual or employer-based, forcing individuals to purchase health insurance or forcing employers to provide that insurance for them. The general theme involved in all of these components is that there will be a concentration of power in Washington, D.C. Greater government involvement in 1/6 of the United States economy, which affects us all in this room today. Now, how might these goals be achieved? This is somewhat of a dry topic, but I think it's essential to understand where we are today. How does a bill become a law? The points on the screen reflect somewhat of a bell curve in that, and we are presently in between committee action and floor action. However, once this bill, or proposed bill, gets to the floor of the United States Congress, it's basically downhill from there. If you're familiar with the Greek myth of Sisyphus, Sisyphus had been punished by the gods, and he was forced to push a rock up a hill. But when he got to the top of the hill, he was unable to push the rock over. The rock kept rolling back down the hill, and Sisyphus would have to push it back up again. That's somewhat analogous to the position of the Democrats with healthcare in the United States. They've been very interested in enacting some sort of universal coverage or healthcare reform, but they haven't been able to push that boulder over the hill, like Sisyphus. The present conditions are their best chance, and they are at the top of the hill. Once any proposed legislation gets to the floor, as I suggested, it is all downhill from there, and the legislation is likely to be passed. A number of bills were introduced into both houses of Congress over the summer. At the time we went to press, 3 of the bills had emerged from committee, 1 from the Senate, 2 from the House. Last week, right before we got on the plane to come here to Athens, there was another bill that emerged from committee that was made public by Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. You can see the length of these bills is simply enormous. As a point of comparison, the United States Constitution is 4 pages long. The Bill of Rights adds another page to that. And you may draw your own conclusions, but a very wise man once noted that brevity is the soul of wit. And it doesn't appear that any of these pieces of legislation is very brief, at least to me. One thing I wanted to note about committees is they are smaller groups of senators or representatives, specialists in their field, who hash out arguments and details on the respective policies. So if there are senators or representatives who have experience in banking or finance, they are on that committee and they deal with the bill at that level. Once it emerges from committee to the general floor of the House of Representatives or the Senate, that's when the entire Congress gets to debate the issue. This is normally a very methodical and deliberate process. Since the process has already drug on for 6 months, even a year, by some estimates, it is in the Democrats' interest and the party who wishes to enact this legislation to expedite this process if possible. The details are important, but the essential point is that the Democrats have the votes, if necessary, to expedite the process through the House and get it off the House floor. With a vote of the entire Congress of yes to pass the legislation, it will go to the President for signature. There is no doubt that the President will sign any legislation on his desk under the idea of health care reform. He has a lot personally invested in the process, as does the Democratic Party in general. Once the President signs the bill, after it's voted on by the House of Representatives and the Senate, it becomes a law, and it will require all of us to change how it is that we practice and process health care claims on travel insurance matters.